Good morning. It's Sunday, February 5.
Compass Community Church, exploring faith together. Compass Community Church, exploring faith together.
I'm continuing my series of reflections on prepositions. Prepositions are small but really important words that connect nouns in sentences and in verbal speech. So prepositions really establish and maintain relationships. And when you think about how prepositions function in that way, it's interesting to think about how they also function in a relationship that we have with people, and especially in the relationship we have with God. And so in praise of prepositions may sound like a bit of an abstract study, but it's a really important personal study. It evaluates who Jesus is and what living in a relationship with Jesus is all about. I began a few weeks ago by having us think about what it means to have a life built on Jesus. On. Just two letters, a small preposition. But it makes such an incredible difference in our lives when you think about living on Jesus, the ground beneath our feet, the foundation of our life, giving us security now and a hope for an incredible future. And in the second series, I reflected on what it means for us to live under Jesus. And if you recall, the two main ideas that we thought about in that message had to do with how the word under suggests two very important things, that we are under someone's care and someone's authority. And so to be under Jesus means that he's Lord and Savior, someone that needs to be obeyed and respected, and yet someone who loves us, not just a judge who lays down the law, but a friend, a Savior who loves us and cares for us. So today we're going to think about another preposition, behind Jesus, what it means to follow Jesus as a disciple still today. I'm going to read a passage from Mark's Gospel that tells us how Jesus called his first disciples, and this passage is going to say a lot about what it means for us to know ourselves as disciples who follow Jesus still today. But before I read that passage, let's hear this song from our praise team.
Christ is my reward and all of my devotion. Now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy. Through every trial, my soul will sing, no turning back. I've been set free. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ, my all in all, my joy and my salvation. And his hope will never fail. Heaven is our hope. Through every storm, my soul will sing. Jesus is here. To God be the glory. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning.
So today's passage is found in Mark chapter 3, and I'll read verses 13 through 19. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach, and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These were the original disciples of Jesus, men who literally got behind Jesus. They followed him. It's so interesting that in Mark's gospel, the description of how Jesus called disciples is quite brief. Mark is not like other gospel writers. When they describe how Jesus called disciples, Matthew and Luke give more details. There are stories behind the calling of these disciples, individually sometimes. But Mark is incredibly spare. He gives us very few details on how these disciples came to be disciples. But I'd like us to notice three important things that are part of this description. Three very, very important things about what it means to be behind Jesus for us still today. And I'd like us to think, first of all, about how Jesus called to himself those he wanted. That's how Mark puts it. He called those he wanted. It's a good place to start. It affirms that these disciples were people that Jesus chose. They didn't find Jesus. They heard the call and followed him. I think that's a very important thing to begin with because, as you've probably heard me mention in many of my messages, the work of God is always primary in our lives. It is always God's grace, God's initiative that plays a much more important role in our relationship with God than our own initiative, our own choice, our own resources. Grace is primary. And we see that even in this very brief description of how Jesus called disciples. He called those he wanted. And so that means we today, when we get behind Jesus, when we decide to be a follower of Jesus, and sometimes people like to use that term, Christ follower, instead of disciple. Disciple may seem to be a bit of an archaic word. We don't always understand what that word might suggest, but a Christ follower is a literal description of what it means to be a disciple. You follow Jesus. And when we do that only because we have heard the call. That's primary. We are still today, and it's amazing to think about this, people that Jesus wants to be with him. They want you. He wants you to be with him. And this is such good news. And when you look at the list of people that Jesus called to himself, who followed him, it's an amazing assortment of individuals. What an incredible variety we see in these 12. Incredible diversity. And when you think about what it means to follow Jesus today, this continues to be the case. We do that individually, of course, but we follow Jesus in community with others. When you think about the presence of Christianity in the world today and down through the ages, there is an incredible diversity that is evident in that huge gathering that spans time and place. All these individuals that transcend all ethnic and cultural barriers, historical settings. Diversity. We see that even in these 12. And it's very interesting that in the day of rabbis and disciples, the world that Jesus came to live in, rabbis didn't typically choose their disciples. Parents typically would find a prominent rabbi that they wanted to be the rabbi for their sons. And they would especially be honored if a very popular, renowned rabbi would be one that their son would become a disciple of. And so it was almost as if you applied to have your son become a disciple of a rabbi. The rabbi didn't choose them. You chose the rabbi. And so it's interesting that Jesus chose these individuals. It suggests that they were kind of people nobody else wanted. They were, if you remember what it was like to choose teams on the playground, they were the ones who were certainly not the first choice that people wanted to be on their team. They were the ones that probably were at the end or near the end, not the typical, responsible, promising type of disciples that rabbis would have chosen. But Jesus chose them. And it's an incredible thing. It again highlights the grace and the love, the way that Jesus saw these people in a very specific and unique way. I've always loved the way that Peter Scazzaro, who's written a lot of great things about what it means to be emotionally strong as a Christian, as a Christ follower, emotionally healthy. He describes the calling of Jesus' disciples in these words. And notice in these words how the diversity of these 12 individuals is really highlighted. Jesus formed a community with a small group from Galilee, a backward province in Palestine. They were neither spiritually nor emotionally mature. Peter, the point leader, had a big problem with his mouth and was a bundle of contradictions. Andrew, his brother, was quiet and behind the scenes. James and John were given the names sons of thunder because they were aggressive, hot-headed, ambitious, and intolerant. Philip was skeptical and negative. He had limited vision. "We can't do that," summed up his faith when confronted by the problem of feeding the 5,000. Nathaniel Bartholomew was prejudiced and opinionated. Matthew was the most hated person in Capernaum, working in a profession that abused innocent people as a tax collector. Thomas was melancholy, mildly depressive, and pessimistic. James, son of Alphaeus, and Judas, son of James, were nobodies. The Bible says nothing about them. Simon the Zealot was a freedom fighter and a terrorist in his day. Judas the treasurer was a thief and a loner. He pretended to be loyal to Jesus before finally betraying him. Most of them, however, did have this one great quality. They were willing. That is all God asks of us. It's an incredibly accurate description of these 12 individuals. Can you imagine how it must have been difficult for them to get along with each other, given the diversity, given the emotions and the feelings that they had for each other and others having for them? You would think that this group, this weird assortment of individuals, would have very little potential when it came to following Jesus and making any difference in the world. And yet Jesus chose them. He wanted them. He saw something in them. The way another person puts it is incredibly reassuring for us today when you think about how Jesus saw them, how he sees us, inviting us to become followers of Jesus, getting behind Jesus still today. He puts it this way: better than anyone in history, in any field or discipline, Jesus capitalized on the possibility in people, the hidden potential inherent in all of us. He had an uncanny ability to look past the obvious flaws in people's lives, and he envisioned who they could become if the power of God were released in their lives. He wondered about people, wondered about what they could become. He somehow saw the godly worshiper clothed as a worn, wearied prostitute. He saw the faithful disciple hiding inside a fisherman named Simon. He saw the hidden philanthropist in the life of a crooked tax collector named Zacchaeus, the risk-taker and a cowardly Jewish ruler named Nicodemus. What a fantastic gift Jesus had for seeing what nobody else could see. And that continues to be the case today. To get behind Jesus only happens because he sees something in us, the image of God, incredible potential. When the power of God is unleashed in us, he looks through over all of the obvious flaws in our lives. He wants to be with us. He chooses us. That's the amazing thing. It's all grace. It's all his initiative. It's all the way that Jesus sees people. Now, there's two other things in this brief and yet startling analysis of Mark's description of how Jesus called disciples. These were individuals he wanted. But notice why he chose these individuals: that they might be with him and that he might send them out. Did you notice that in the verses that I read with you? He chose these 12 so that they might be with him and so that he might send them out. So companionship and mission. That's really what it means to be a follower of Jesus still today, to be behind Jesus. We are with Jesus and we are out in the world for Jesus. I'll say more about what it means to be for Jesus in a future message, another preposition, for, that really accentuates the mission of discipleship. Now, we need to clarify what Jesus means when he talked about having disciples being with him. We sometimes might think that that means companionship. We are with Jesus in a very comfortable pastoral setting. We enjoy being with Jesus. And of course, all of this is true. But when Jesus called disciples to be with him, it meant something much more than just being physically with somebody. Being with him meant that he wanted to train them. He wanted them to become like him. And this really gets at the relationship that rabbis had with their disciples. Disciples were literally students. That's what the word disciple means. You are a student of the master. You study the master. You learn from the master. Why? So that you could become like the master. Jesus gets at this in the way Matthew describes how he sent out the 12 for mission. Matthew chapter 10. And Jesus in that chapter says in verses 24 and 25, "A student is not above his teacher. It is enough for the student to be like his teacher." That was the goal that every student, every disciple had. They wanted to not only be with the rabbi, and they were with the rabbi literally, constantly, 24 hours a day. They were with the rabbi, traveling with the rabbi, listening to the rabbi, learning from the rabbi. Why? So they could become like the rabbi. Ray Vander Laan is someone who has spent a lot of time preaching and writing on this very topic. There's a book that borrows from something that he has mentioned a lot over the years in his Bible studies and in his trips to Israel that many people have accompanied him on. Walking in the Dust of Rabbi Jesus. It's an interesting title. And walking in the dust of the rabbi really conjures up an image of what discipleship was like back then. You would walk so closely to the rabbi that the dust kicked up by the rabbi's feet would fall on you. The dust of your rabbi would be your dust. That's how closely you followed the rabbi. And some of you perhaps listening to this message will remember Ray Vander Laan. He served as an associate pastor in the church I served in New Jersey, not during my time there, but his impact continued to linger and be a blessing in that place, in the field of education and in ministry in that congregation. Ray wrote the foreword of this book that's written by Lois Tyverberg that really explores what being a disciple of Jesus, being behind Jesus is all about, becoming like Jesus. It was the goal of every disciple. You were a student. I love the word apprentice. That's what a disciple is really all about. You are an apprentice. You not only sit back and absorb and learn in an abstract way, you do what the rabbi is doing. You follow the example. You put it into practice. You struggle. You make lots of mistakes, but you learn. That's what being behind Jesus is about. You become like him in every way. Now that suggests that there are different ways of learning, isn't it? That still continues to be the case today. How do you learn something? If you want to take up the gift of painting, for instance, if you want to learn how to paint pictures, how do you do that? Well, you watch somebody who's very skilled at it. You might follow Bob Ross, for example, on YouTube videos and try to paint as he painted. That's one way. You're detached from someone. You just observe what they do. A second way, and we're seeing how this act of learning intensifies as we make our way through this. The second way is that you actually become a student of someone. They have a one-to-one relationship with you. They train you. They might, if you're thinking about playing tennis or golf, for instance, actually help you make certain movements that make a tennis serve or a golf shot more effective. They actually are helping you. And so you can see how it's more than just watching someone, somebody who's training you. is moving you, showing you in a very personal way how to do certain things. But here's where the gospel becomes very, very important and unique. Discipleship is not about just seeing someone. That's where it begins. It's not just about having somebody who has followed Jesus for a long, long time help you. No, it's about Jesus himself coming to be in you, taking over your body, filling your heart, his Spirit, changing you, empowering you. The only thing about being a disciple of Jesus that ultimately matters is that he takes over us and invades our life so that following Jesus becomes something that we do in every context of our lives. That's what being with Jesus is all about. We follow and we become like him. And notice as well here, as we think about the second thing that Jesus highlights, or that the text highlights, Jesus brought people to himself to be with him, but also to send them out. This is the mission that I'll spend more time on in a future message. But I want to highlight that here. To be a follower of Jesus means that we are in the world today, the presence of Jesus in the world today, so that the call of Jesus that is still issued in the world, inviting people to follow him, is issued through people like you and me. That's what these videos are trying to accomplish. It's what Compass Community Church is all about, being the voice of Jesus, the hands and feet of Jesus in the world today, so that people can still hear the call to follow him in and through us. And so the work of mission involves doing things in the world that make a difference in people's lives. We might not preach the word or drive out demons or heal the sick. We might not do as extravagant things as the disciples did when Jesus initially called these 12, but we can and will make a difference if we follow him. If we become like him, the world will notice. The world will join us as we follow Jesus, as we love to say here at Compass Community Church, explore faith together. I hope you know what it means to follow Jesus, to be behind him, to be a member in this incredible, diverse community of Christ followers. Know that Jesus still wants you to be a disciple. That's the amazing thing of this passage. Jesus called those he wanted, and he continues to call those he wants. Think of it this way. The original community of disciples included 12, but you can add your name to that incredibly long list. Your name. Jesus wants you to be a follower so that you can be with him, learn from him, become like him, and do his work in the world still today in simple, hidden, glorious, and holy ways. I hope this video has helped you understand more clearly what it means to be behind Jesus, to have the dust of the rabbi fall on us as we become increasingly like him, as we make him the most important person in our life, as we explore faith together, individually, and most importantly, in the community that he has established, that we are blessed to be a part of. If you have any questions about what being a disciple or a Christ follower is all about, please contact us. Explore at compasschurchstrathroy.ca. Join us on Sunday mornings for worship. We are still today a diverse community of Christ followers, and we would love to see you be a part of that. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it has clarified and invited you to follow Jesus, to get behind him. And I look forward to sharing more with you in future videos about what it means to live in the world for Jesus still today. Thanks so much for watching. Be well and be blessed.
Compass Community Church, exploring faith together. Compass Community Church, exploring